has leaked intelligence, exposed Wagner mercenaries, brutal tactics. Will they actually achieve anything? And are they focusing their efforts, doubling down on Bakhmut, even at tremendous price? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is December 20th, 2022. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into all of it. Okay, first, when we look at the tactical map, there are a couple of changes to the front line, notably that the Russian forces have purportedly seized what they are describing as the Syniat plant. On the outskirts of Bakhmut, it looks like is some of their industrial centers. There was a mining operation out here, and so it seems like there's also a plant that they have recently seized. But I want to point out that this river forms an important boundary simply because it forces Russian forces to be canalized, to cross only at these two designated crossing points. And that can make them very vulnerable. It's one of the reasons why they fight so hard for this small, bridgehead of sorts here. But it also means that territory like this plant is something that Ukrainian forces probably expect to yield to Russian forces. I would imagine that they're probably going to advance up to this canal, just given that there's this large natural barrier here that Russian forces will have a hard time crossing. We also, of course, see that Russian forces have advanced in two cities to the north, Berestove and Belogorivka. Berestove and Belohorivka. You can see here that there are some changes to Belohorivka, though it remains listed as in Russian control. You can also see that Berestove is listed as fully Russian controlled. Again, we've talked about these villages, Yakovlivka. This is probably part of Russia's effort to seize these outlying villages in an effort to, again, take Bakhmut, to cut off the ability of Ukrainian forces to direct resupply efforts to Bakhmut. But really essential to that is Soledar, and that's still a tall order if they can't make advances here. Two other final notes. Nevelsky has seen some advances. This is, again, near Donetsk City. And is part of Russia's effort to sort of expand this perimeter around Donetsk City. And finally, Russian forces have been pushed back from the wood line near Kremenina. You guys can see there a small advance by Ukrainian forces. And like in Bakhmut, this river, the Seversky Donetsk, is, again, a natural barrier, and you can see how some of these battle lines just comport perfectly to this natural barrier in the form of a river. And it can, again, control of this can be very, very significant. And you guys can see here how the front lines naturally sort of trace along this river. When we look over to, of course, the tactical map, you can see what's interesting is that the attacks in the last 24 hours have been overwhelmingly concentrated in Bakhmut. 5 different directions the Russians have attacked. This is possibly because Russia was aware that President Zelensky actually visited Russian or Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut. This may have been part of an effort to show force, to potentially embarrass Zelensky. Maybe the idea was to force him to leave early, or score some other morale victory to make it look like Ukrainian forces were unable to protect the president. It's also, of course, possible that given Russia's faltering command and control, that this is just part of a separate effort by Russian active duty units or Wagner or the DNR to try to simply push harder into Bakhmut, seize some of these significant pieces of territory like we talked about, right? This plant here, this foothold across the canal, possibly even these roadways that would enable Russian forces to circumvent the canal entirely. But it appears that none of them were successful. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why. Now, we've talked in this channel quite a bit about the overall significance of Bakhmut. We're going over to ground news, right? This has been a story that's circulated from different sources, but it's been covered, of course, by The Guardian, Independent, 24 Talker, and I found actually Radio Free Liberty has a very similar story. So we can infer that there's at least some truth to it. But what I wanted to point out is that Western officials seem to be agreeing with my assessment. We are scratching our heads, a Western official told AFP this week when asked about Russia's focus on Bakhmut. We don't know the answer. The Institute for the Study of War, of course, agrees. Even if Russian troops continue to advance within Bakhmut, even if they force a controlled Ukrainian withdrawal, the city of Bakhmut itself offers little operational benefit. The costs associated with 6 months of grinding, attrition-based combat far outweigh any operational advantage that Russians can obtain from taking Bakhmut. And this is one of the reasons. And also in this article, they interview Ukrainian troops actually defending Bakhmut. And this is what I thought was interesting. Russian combat deaths are estimated at 60 to 100 per day. And while a steady stream of casualties has been inflicted on Ukrainian defenders, I want to point out that 60 to 100 deaths per day is different simply because the Russian forces don't appear to issue body armor. Effective body armor is a potential game changer. And when these guys don't have it, they're going to take they're going to take higher numbers of casualties, full stop. And they're definitely going to take significant casualties or significantly more KIA relative to the number of WIA. Many of the casualties inflicted on Ukrainians likely are much more minor, right? The distribution of casualties skews more minor, more recoverable than obviously troops who are not only on the offensive, right, who have to come out of their positions and take risk, but who don't have the body armor or basic protective gear to keep them safe while doing so. So there's almost no way that Ukrainians are seeing this. This is, I would say 60 to 100 a day is probably the number of wounded Ukrainians. Probably, my guess would be about 50% of them are back in the fight within 72 hours. When they talk to the Ukrainians, they say, quote, they being the Wagner group, send one group after another against our position. If an attack doesn't succeed, they'll just try again in the exact same way. The only strategy I can see at this point is they want to take the city so they can claim some kind of victory after a year of so many losses. We've noticed in the past 2 weeks an increase in shelling and infantry attacks as if they are in a rush to take Bakhmut. That also means they are suffering ever greater losses. They're just throwing in meat. Prigozhin himself has said that our task in Bakhmut is the destruction of the Ukrainian army and the reduction of its combat potential, an extremely positive effect on other areas, which is why we dubbed the operation the Bakhmut meat grinder. Okay, guys, this is just madness. This is obviously a tremendous cope because Ukraine also has this as their objective. When we go over to Radio Free Liberty, who can get access to higher level Ukrainian officials, the official, a U.S. official has said, for whatever reason, we continue to see Russia prioritize this particular area. And the Ukrainian commander of Ukrainian's ground forces has said, quote, militarily, Bakhmut has no strategic importance, but it has psychological significance due to the earlier battlefield losses in Kharkiv and Kherson. So I bring all of this up so that you guys can understand just how broken. When I talk about Russia's broken chain of command, this is what I mean. A good chain of command, right? When the commander makes a mistake or develops tunnel vision, that commander relies on their staff to tell them real, true, accurate information on the front lines about what their units are able to do, about what their units' current actions will realistically be able to achieve. And this two-way flow of information, orders from the commander down and information from the battlefield up, are the key, the fundamental key to making military operations happen. This isn't any different than a company, right? If you, instead of seizing Bakhmut, you were trying to sell widgets in Bakhmut, you would need the same thing. There would have to be some sort of CEO who would issue strategic plans and visions for how it was going to be done. And then that CEO would rely on feedback from the front to change the plans, adjust the strategy, or check the progress. The fact that we're seeing Russia run the same playbook over and over again is sometimes what a bureaucracy, like a headless bureaucracy, will do. It will continue with institutional momentum, repeating the same processes over and over again because there's no leadership at the top to provide vision. It's almost like the bureaucratic version of an autopilot. Sometimes we call them like standing orders that you do without having to be given them. And in the US, of course, we will sometimes have these sort of broad standing orders, but commanders at the lower levels have tremendous power and are expected, in fact, instructed to, if their prior command becomes rudderless, they are actually instructed to increase their own efforts to accomplish the mission and assume a level of authority that would not normally go to them. I've certainly had that as a platoon leader. I found myself in many instances in command of companies, sometimes even in command of senior officers, simply because I was the planner and organizer of an operation, and because I was the battle space owner of the region, and everyone else, all the remaining companies, were enablers to my operation. And I say that not because their companies were rudderless or unable to; their commanders were perfectly competent, but it was simply a case of the fact that I needed that many forces to accomplish my goal. And without them, I couldn't do it. And so that meant I sort of had to expand my own perception, my own span of control to include more units, right? I had to become a company commander to achieve my mission. I don't think Russian forces are comparably empowered. I think it seems like their officers just run the same play again and again until they're ordered to stop. And that's what we're seeing in Bakhmut. And it's really unfortunate because almost everyone, it appears, but almost everyone seems to know it, but is just unable to do it. Frightening that even Prigozhin himself, the supreme commander of Wagner forces, recognized that he is grinding his forces down to nothing. Anyway, guys, that is all I had for you for today. Be sure to check out the Instagram, check out the Facebook. There's a lot of impersonators on Facebook, so if you check the link, give me a like, give me a follow on there. It'll help show Facebook that's the legitimate page. And of course, if you want access to the uncensored combat videos, those are all on the Patreon. Thanks so much to my lieutenant tier patrons. And of course, if you want to check out ground news yourself for free, that link is also in the comments as well. So I'll see you guys in the next one.